Everybody give it up. Our next guest is Total Biscuit, the cynical Brit, and he's here to talk about probably pretty much everything.
That's the plan, anyway. First of all, I've got to apologize to everybody here that was hoping for the Total Space Biscuit panel. He's not here. He's a bit of an asshole, so frankly, I'm better anyway. This will be mostly a Q&A session, I believe. So anyone that wants to ask a question is feel free to do just that, but we're going to have our man Wes over here start things off, because otherwise it's going to feel pretty useless.
Well, I'm usually pretty useless. Anyway, so how did you start getting into gaming video?
I got into gaming video after stubbornly refusing to do gaming video for years. And it was simply because I believe podcasts were the way to go, which is true until you have rent to pay, and then it's not the way to go anymore. Because good luck getting anything whatsoever from that. I started a site, well, I didn't start the site, but I took it over. A man by the name of Athala started a site called WoW Radio in 2004. I joined early 2005, did a show there, started off being a metal DJ, then started doing a talk show about World of Warcraft for 2 hours every week. Apparently there is enough to talk about for 2 hours every single week for God knows how many years of my life that I wasted in that ridiculous game. But after that, and kind of, WoW Radio ran its course, and we all kind of split up in 2010. We started our own sites. I started something called Cynical Brit, and I kept doing the podcast, but I'd done a little bit of video for World of Warcraft Radio prior to that, and wasn't really feeling it. Didn't like it too much. The software I was using was just awkward. It took too long. It wasn't as cool as podcasting or live streaming, and at that point, live streaming wasn't really all that practical anyway. So I stuck with the podcast for a while and ended up doing gaming video at the point when I got kicked out of my job at a financial advisory and had nothing better to do with my time. So I decided, you know what, let's make a few videos about the Cataclysm beta, and started doing that. And that ended up taking off, and that eventually became a job after Husky, who many of you know is a StarCraft caster and one of the founding members of the Game Station, which is now Polaris, which is now Disney conglomerate Evil Empire Incorporated, apparently. Forgot my Mickey Mouse ears at home. I think I'm going to get fired after this. But whatever the case, he got me right into the network very, very early on, saved me from a scam contract, which would have had me doing probably about 50, 60 hours a week worth of StarCraft 2 casting for a company that offered to pay me a grand sum of $700 a month for it. And I was that close to taking it because I had nothing else. I had to get something. Someone had to pay the rent, but a night before I was about to sign that contract, Husky gave me this offer. I took the offer, and now I'm sitting right here. So.
Now, you mentioned that you wasted a lot of your life playing World of Warcraft.
Most of us did, I assume.
Why do you feel like, what's the definition of a waste of life for a game? How do you feel, what's a game that you're wasting your life on versus one that you're not wasting your life on?
I don't really think that there is such a thing as having a game that you waste your life on, outside of making the usual jokes about, hey, isn't WoW addictive? Wow, didn't I just spend 7 years of my life playing this video game? But if I were to say, hey, can I go back in time, do that all that again? I mean, I would say, no, probably not. There's definitely times when you play a game long term where you find a period that you just say, why am I still playing this? And maybe you just stop for a while, but you pick it back up again. And generally the reason you do that is because of the people you're playing with. And MMOs are an inherently social experience, as much as they're touted as an antisocial one. You, in order to succeed, have to cooperate with other people who you've never met, who may be from different countries, different cultures. They may not even speak your language correctly, but it's never a waste to get the opportunity to interact with people like that, and more to the point, accomplish a goal together. Even if it's not a real one, it's still that feeling of cooperation and collaboration that's actually fulfilling. And if I could go back and change all of that, well, it would be pretty stupid, because I wouldn't be where I am today if I did. And secondly, I don't think I'd want to anyway.
What would you like if you were to go, like you mentioned, if you could go back and change things, and you probably wouldn't because of where you are, but do you think you've evolved as a gamer to where your focus is not on those kinds of games anymore? Is there somewhere where your focus is more oriented nowadays?
I like the term evolution instead of bored out of my skull with games like that. Because I think that part two of that would probably be true. You could say, hey, have you evolved past the point where you just want to play a hotkey MMO for 7 years straight and interact with people? I don't know. I think that mechanically, games like WoW just will start to grate on you after a while, and I think that anyone who played that game for that long probably isn't going to say, yeah, you know what, I think the game mechanics of this game are just rock solid. They're really, really good. I absolutely love the combat. I enjoy playing whack-a-mole with heals or anything like that. I don't really think people do, but they enjoy the social experience that's involved in it, and they're willing to put up with things in order to get that social experience. It's a similar experience of going to a loud bar that plays the music you don't like. You go there because your friends wanted to go there, not because you enjoyed the music in the first place. And then you just drink away the pain, which is similar to my WoW experiences, actually. But yeah, I don't think you necessarily evolve past that point, because that implies the people that still play the game are making the wrong decision, or that it's some kind of entry-level game that you get past and you grow past. I don't think you do. It's just that if you stick with one game for too long, I feel that your mindset can become so narrow. There's such an incredible range of games available these days that you can partake in. We're getting new genres popping up on an almost monthly basis, either based on previous genres or just coming out of nowhere, like Goat Simulator, for instance, which is no doubt going to be absolutely phenomenal until a few people on YouTube run it into the ground. But for the few days when that doesn't happen, it's going to be great, no doubt. And it's a really exciting time to especially be a PC gamer. You've got so much choice, in fact, too much choice, some would say. So why bury so much time into one particular title when you can experience so much more than that?
How was when you first got into gaming video, was it more review-oriented? And have you enjoyed, like, branching into the Let's Play area?
Well, I generally don't enjoy branching into the Let's Play area, because every time that happens, I end up having to do it with Jesse Cox, which is a painful experience. And I don't really know why I still do that, actually. I've done a podcast with him for a number of years, and we have this interesting love-hate relationship going on where he has the ability to just train wreck everything he's involved in. And surprisingly enough, that actually makes for good viewing, which all common sense would say that that's not the case. But it goes back to the dawn of comedy, doesn't it? It's just straight man, funny man kind of thing going on, and that seems to work. But when I started creating videos initially, it was actually informative. I wouldn't call it either Let's Play or review, actually. More of an informative kind of guide or walkthrough based idea specifically aimed at WoW, saying, here is some content, here is what you're about to see, here's how you do it in the best way. And that was a more natural transition out to review-based content than I think it would ever be to Let's Play or anything along those lines. And I think I like to call the channel critique. I think that, that's a nice little catch-all phrase that doesn't have any of the connotations of review. If I suddenly say, here's my review of this, people are like, well, what's the score? Do you give it 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 9.5, 5 beetroots out of 17? What's the score here? Can I Metacritic? No, you can't Metacritic, go away. And I just prefer the idea of kind of being a critic and just having the freedom to spend as much time as I want on whatever subject I want. I feel a traditional review, you've got to kind of wrap it up between 5 to 10 minutes. You watch a video review, it's always going to be 5 to 10 minutes. A written review, a couple of pages, used to have to fit in a magazine. I think that as a medium, we've got past that point. We don't need a specific format anymore. You can do whatever you want to do, and as long as you can get an audience for it, you can rabble on for as long as you want about a title. And there's some really interesting gaming videos on YouTube that are 3 hours long about one game. So it's kind of awesome that we get the opportunity to do that.
How much of your commentary is rambling on, and how much have you put down in notes before you start doing your...
There's a good 99.5% of it is rambling on, I think. But more specifically, I don't write anything down. I've tried actually scripting out things, and I'm really bad at reading scripts. It's actually a skill that you need to acquire, because the inflections in your voice start to go to very strange places if you are reading from a script, and it's very hard to adapt your voice to sound like it's just coming off the top of your head like it would be right now. It'll sound more robotic. The pacing will be completely off. You'll even mess up your enunciation, because you will specifically know what's coming up in the next sentence, and you almost change the tone of your voice to suit that, whereas if you're just talking like this, it just appears more natural, more organic, things like that. The only thing I do for any of my videos outside of the kind of research required to do a news show, like, say, Content Patch, which will be me reading the sites required in order to get the information and then transposing that into a sort of stream of consciousness spoken form, is I'll just write down a couple of bullet points. I say, right, this is where I want to start, this is where I want to end. Okay, let's talk 45 minutes and fill it in the middle. And It works better. I've never done well with content where I prepare too much.
Speaking about not preparing, have you been approached to do any voice work for anybody? Have you ever considered it?
I've done a couple. I voiced a character in a game called Awesome Noughts by the name of Vinny and Spike. They asked me, hey, would you like to voice characters? I said, yeah, absolutely. Well, what voice do you want me to do? I'm not really much of a voice actor. I can do Cockney, Northern British, Southern British, fake British, Queen's English British, Space British. But outside of that, it's like, all right, well, we want you to really do a 1920s Chicago mobster. I'm like, you what? So that's in the game, and that will never go away, and that scares me. So if I want to get a job anywhere else, I'm going to be in trouble if they stumble across that one. But I've done that. I actually did a voice pack for Tribes, for Hi-Rez. I did some awful, awful voice acting in Space Pirates and Zombies, which I highly recommend skipping all the cutscenes for. It's just terrible. But it's not my thing. I'm not very good at it, really. I can't even keep my own voice in check, let alone somebody else's. So I try to avoid that whenever possible.
What kind of stuff do you see on the future in gaming that's got you really excited? Like, what's in the near future that's really making you think some exciting things are happening in our field?
Virtual reality, I think. VR in particular has been a dream that's been chased for God knows how many years. I recall putting on this awful, clunky VR headset at a computer expo that was happening in Newcastle. I went with my dad when it must have been early 90s. And we put this gigantic thing on. I immediately felt, right, well, I'm going to need a chiropractor quite soon if I keep playing any further. But they put Heretic on this thing. And it was just like having your eyes closer to a screen. The VR experience wasn't there, the depth wasn't there, so it's like, well, this is a nice piece of kit, how much is it? £3,000. I'm like, you what? So needless to say, he didn't sell too many of those that day, but VR's got to the point where it might actually work, and the prototypes that I've tried out have been scary as hell, and pretty fantastic, and I think that the tech is definitely going places. Of course, the main company has now been bought out by Facebook, which has upset quite a few people. But regardless, I think like VR is coming in one form or another. Now, if somehow Oculus messes it up, then Sony has its Morpheus project. There's been several other projects which are now currently in the works. I think we're going to get there one way or the other. And I suppose the question is whether or not it becomes a passing thing like 3D or whether it will actually be a real innovation in gaming, and there'll actually be games specifically made for that experience, and whether or not it will change the way that we design games, even on the basic UI level. Valve was talking about how difficult it was to get Team Fortress 2 running on Oculus Rift. In theory, it's very easy, but all of the user interface elements that you would usually see in that game are completely wrong for VR. They just don't work properly. So they've had to redesign that, and I think it's really fascinating that you would have to completely redesign your game in order to work properly on a display device. You'd think, oh, is this a monitor replacement? For gaming, it could be. We might not even bother buying really good gaming monitors anymore if the VR's good enough. We'll just plug that in, game on that, and then browse Reddit on whatever crappy little monitor we can get our hands on.
And what kind of games have got you excited lately? What are you playing the most of lately?
At the moment, I'm playing a lot of Reaper of Souls until it bores me, which it might eventually, but I'm on the Diablo loot train at the moment, and it's going all right, so we'll see how that goes. Playing a bit of Heroes of the Storm, which is actually surprisingly great, and I was shocked by that. It was not something I was really looking forward to. It's obviously an adaptation of Blizzard Dota, which was going to be a free mod for StarCraft 2, until they realized, oh, you know these Dota games? They're making quite a lot of money. Let's make a real game based around that instead of just making it a mod for StarCraft 2. But let's use the StarCraft 2 engine anyway, because we're halfway there anyway. But that game's actually pretty fun. It does involve playing with 5 other people to really get a good experience, because otherwise it's a nightmare, especially right now. In the alpha, the matchmaking is just terrible. So if you want to be matched up with 4 people straight out of training against some guy's 5-stack who's like, well, between us, we've got about 56 years of Dota experience, and 3 of us actually designed the game, so you're in for a good time here. That can happen, and it's unpleasant. But yeah, Heroes of the Storm is pretty fun. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully, they continue to add new maps and actually increase the variety of the gameplay.
Okay, well, if we want to take some questions from the audience, if anybody wants to step up. Okay.
You see, he was cheating. He was right next to the microphone. Look at that.
Hi. It was funny when you mentioned Jesse Cox and how that could have been painful playing with him, because my question was already going to be, with your WTF series, I was wondering if you could look into cooperative games and maybe try to find somebody you like to play cooperative games on a WTF.
Well, it definitely wouldn't be with him, I can tell you that for a fact. If we want to get anything done, hey, geez, we managed to stretch Terraria out to, what, hundreds of episodes, just purely based on his own incompetence. So it was good for the monetization, but lousy for the progress. And the co-op stuff is interesting because I think in some situations you really need to do it. I have been wanting to do a video of Towerfall, for instance. Towerfall does not have online multiplayer, so if I do a video on that, I'm only going to be critiquing the single player, which is missing the point. You know, it's like playing Heroes of the Storm and saying, hey, I'm going to critique this based purely on the bot AI, which is a terrible idea. So I would love to do more of that stuff. If I can't do it with the missus at home, then it comes down to finding someone that has a good microphone, has a different perspective. I think the worst thing you can do when you're doing any kind of collab that's also a critique is to have someone that shares the exact same opinions as you, because it's a waste of time. You might as well have not even brought them on in the first place. I think that could be a problem, particularly with the podcast. We have a lot of opinions that are very similar to each other. We don't disagree that much. And when we do, it usually ends in tears. But I would love to do more of it. It's more difficult to do online than it is in a studio. You have to rely on the other guy recording his audio locally and not messing up, which, trust me, that doesn't happen that often. There's a lot of messing up involved in that. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. If just one person messes their audio up or messes their video recording up, your entire recording is essentially shot at that point. And you really can't recapture what it was that you just got because it was very much kind of off the top of the head. So it can be more difficult to do collab, and it can really compromise the quality of your audio, which is why I don't do that much of it, with the exception of people I really trust to have good audio and to be reliable. So funnily enough, Jesse would be the most reliable person I know, so I think I need to expand my circle of friends a little bit.
Okay,
Thank you.
If there was one thing on Steam you would change, what would it be?
Oh, God. Just one? Just one?
Yeah, I mean, there's 1,000 things.
Yeah, I was going to say, geez. Outside of nuking infestation survivor stories back into the 7 hells it came from, it would most assuredly be curating the front page better. And if you want a prime example, let's see if I can bring this up right now, because someone sent me a screenshot earlier and said, oh, my phone's off, that's probably for the best. But so I can remember off the top of my head, it's burned into my mind. Someone sent me a screenshot and said, look at what's on the front page of Steam today. You're going to have fun going through this. So I load the page up, and where used to be wonderful things like brand new indie releases and exciting AAA titles, what do we see? Well, My Pet Hospital, My Pet Hospital 2, My Animal Hospital, My Horse Hospital. This publisher had just dumped all of these shovelware Animal Hospital titles onto Steam at the same time, 6 of them. And bear in mind the top 10 releases, there's only 10 spots. So all of the new games that came out yesterday, even earlier in the day, just got immediately pushed off the front page.
Yeah, nobody's going to hit the next or the
No, and they never do. And I asked a bunch of indie devs when I was doing my video on the subject, look, does this matter? Like, is this just a convenience thing, or does this actually affect your sales? And every one of them came back and said, oh, it absolutely does. It's to varying degrees, but if you're on that new releases page, you get a quantifiable sales bump. And every time you go off the front page, there's a quantifiable sales drop. So I would love to see the new release page actually be for new releases. I don't care if the new releases are bad, but let's just put it this way. Say I was a big fan of Animal Hospital games. I mean, I look like the kind of person that would be, right? So I want the latest in Animal Hospital technology. I want it rendered in the Unreal 4 engine. I want it to just tax Dual Titans to the absolute limit. I want those horse physics to be beyond belief. And yet, on the new page, what do I see? Animal Hospital from 2003. What use is that to me? It isn't. Absolutely not. So I just cannot understand why Steam would not properly curate that stuff. Every other store on the planet does. Do you walk into a GameStop and see Animal Hospital from 2003 at the front of the store? No, you see it in a bin at the back where it should be, where it belongs. You know, why even give it the time of day? And that can simply be sorted out by not putting games that weren't released this year on the new release section, which you'd think would be common sense. Well, you know, there's 1,000 things I'd want to change about Steam, but right now that's definitely the biggest.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so anyone watching your recent videos in the past few months has seen your opinions on not only Steam, as we talked about, but also things like the way mobile gaming is going.
Mhm.
So my question to you with all of this, I guess, chaos, quote unquote, in the games industry right now. What do you think in the past 4 years, 4 or 5 years, what do you think has been the biggest travesty to the games industry in your opinion?
I think probably the rise of cow clickers more so than anything else. I can deal with bad video games. And I think we've all stumbled across a bad video game at some point. We thought it was going to be great, and it ended up being Aliens Colonial Marines, which is never what you want, is it? But sometimes you buy into the hype, and sometimes you end up with a stinker, and you chalk it up to experience, you write a few angry posts on the internet, and that's that. The problem is that cow clickers just sucked everything that is a game out of the game, called it a game anyway, and then decided to try and make as much money off it as humanly possible. Cow clickers are not video games. They're these cynical service platforms that are specifically designed in such a way that they are a phenomenal waste of your time. And yet, for some reason, a lot of people like to play them, and they've got this down to a science as to when exactly to tell you, you know what would make your life easier? 5,000 fun bucks. That sounds like a great idea. That'll be $20. Just hit this button. It's really easy. Just hit your button. Just type in your password. You got 5,000 fun bucks. This is wonderful. Look at now what you can do in this game. And at some point, you'll suddenly realize everything I've done in this game is a complete waste of time because this game never had a failure state. This game was never a challenge in any way. The only challenge is to your patience. And if you looked at GDC this year, while there were a bunch of good panels, there were so many that were talking about notions like how to monetize whales, how to find people. They call them whales, if you can actually believe that. Those are the people that keep these games running. They spend hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars on these cow clicker titles for some reason, and they're what really keep them going. And they don't design games around what they want the game to be. They design games in such a way to maximize profit margin in the smallest period of time possible. And there is a science to it, and it's just horrible. It's the antithesis of art in any way. I'm not the kind of person that likes to call games art that much, and I don't appreciate games that don't have a lot of gameplay. I'd much rather play Yiba than I would play Gone Home, and that probably makes me a terrible person, but you know what, I'll accept that, because there's no zombie slashing in Gone Home, and I think the game would have been improved if there was. I've got to say, if you put a katana in your game, it's probably going to make the game better. It's really as simple as that. But I can deal with bad games. I can deal with developers that at least tried. Maybe somewhere down the line, the guys that made Ride to Hell Retribution had an idea for a good video game. And then they messed it up because either they're incompetent or they were rushed or money kind of lit up in their eyes and said, we want to dump this project off right now. But at some point, they actually believed it would be a good video game. And nowhere in the history of the universe has anyone that has created a cow clicker ever said, you know what, this will be a really good video game. They designed it with the idea that it will make them a lot of money. And then they can move on to the next one. And then they can trademark words like candy and be reviled around the world. So yes, I do wish that genre, if you can call it that, would just die.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem at all.
All right. So, if you could put a set amount of guidelines or quality guidelines for indie developers, what would they be?
Well, first, you can hit everything that's objective. Yeah. You can make a game and you can believe that that game is good, and people can still slam it critically, and no one's right in that respect. Because it may be that you made a design decision that you firmly believe was the right one, and you still to this day, even if critics absolutely hated it. I can just see a circumstance where things went the other way. Maybe we're on the Earth 2 timeline where, say, Demon's Souls came out and Demon's Souls wasn't critically acclaimed. Let's just say that there was a timeline where that happened. Demon's Souls wasn't critically acclaimed. Everyone hated Demon's Souls. Why did they hate Demon's Souls? Well, there's a bunch of mechanics in that game that I could definitely see you hating, but they really became like the foundation of an incredible series. But what if people didn't believe that? Well, those developers probably still believed it, but what would have happened then is that they'd have had to kind of cave to popular opinion and change the games, and then Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 wouldn't have been as good as they are. But ignoring all the subjective stuff, you can set down a firm set of objective guidelines as to how to make a game for PC that actually works properly and suits as many people as possible. And I cannot understand why you would exclude people. Indie devs in particular are struggling to get sales, right? There's so many indie games that come out every day, and just a tiny fraction of them actually make it big. So why would you ignore colorblind people, for instance? Why would you do that? There's no reason. You can put a colorblind mode into your game very easily. It only takes a very basic understanding of the condition. Put it as a toggleable option, done. You've just appealed to a larger demographic who is actually going to really appreciate you for that. What about left-handed people? That's what, 10% of the population. If you can't rebind your keys, you're probably not going to be playable by left-handed people. And it's such a basic piece of functionality there. Things like field of view for any kind of FPS game. You really need that because people suffer from simulation sickness. It's a real condition. It's not very well researched yet, but it's real, and people do suffer from it. And yet even AAA companies that really should know better because they have the experience to understand it. This is the kind of thing that's taught in gaming courses at university now, the importance of even distance from the screen and that exact science. And they just ignore it. So I would love to see kind of the real PC options menu and inclusivity for people with different conditions be an absolute standard for every single indie developer out there. And if you can be inclusive to somebody and it's not going to break the bank, then why the hell not? Because every time you do that, you are building goodwill and you're increasing your potential sales. So it baffles me when people don't do that.
Thank you for your time.
No worries.
Hi. I was wondering how viable you thought like traditional journalistic content is on YouTube nowadays versus like Let's Plays and improvisational stuff.
That's a really interesting one because I think that your traditional journalistic content for video games has more often than not, at least in history, been written. Yeah? So where was it, let's dive back into the mists of time. When did I read my first game review? I was probably 4. I think it was in I can't remember even the name of the magazine, but it was for the BBC microcomputer Model B. That was a computer that was actually sold by the BBC for their programming courses that they televised. And they were selling these computers. We got one when I was at a very early age, and they started making magazines for them after this. Oh, there's games coming out for this. So I think that was probably where I read my first traditional review, and it was about 3 paragraphs long. And that could be spoken on YouTube in 45 seconds. Would that be useful? Well, probably not. Most people are not really into that. There are some people that actually make formats like 1-minute reviews. I believe ProJared does 1-minute reviews. That's kind of appealing as a gimmick, but strangely enough, that's actually what an entire traditional review would be if it was scripted out and if it was actually read out. I think that it is possible to do more traditional content on YouTube, but you must adapt it because you have so much freedom with the length that you can utilize. If you want to see good critique, like Mr. B-Tongue does incredible stuff, Super Bunny Hop does incredible stuff. Yeah. I thought you might like that. And of course, people like Camster also do really great stuff. And it's the kind of thing that I think if you trace it back, it seems like it's more traditional, but it's taking the idea of academic criticism more so than anything else. It's not even looking back at old school game reviews. I really do genuinely believe that old school reviewing, in the same way that it was done in magazines and a couple of the older websites, is pretty much dead. And it's going to continue to die, and even these sites like IGN have realized it because they've increased their video production rate hugely to catch up with people on YouTube that are already way ahead of them in that regard. But not a lot of people are looking at the way academic criticism is done, which is very wordy, incredibly wordy. And if it's presented with video in the right way, it can actually be extremely informative and extremely entertaining. So I think that that's the place that people need to look, as you yourself are already doing. Although, maybe film a few less videos in graveyards next time.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
Just curious, what do you think of early access games like 7 Days to Die
Ugh.
and DayZ? Both zombie games.
Lots of zombie games, isn't it? It's interesting. There's not a single finished game in that genre. Not one. Not a single one. I wouldn't even count Infestation Survivor Stories as finished. But funnily enough, strangely enough, it's the closest to being done out of any of them. And the zombie survival genre, I don't know if you could even call it that because it crosses over so much with things like Left 4 Dead and Killing Floor, but it's clearly a different genre entirely. It's focused on this idea of survival. Some people have co-opted the term walking simulator, which I think is far more accurate than zombie survival most of the time. I think that's a great, absolutely fantastic term for it. But the question's kind of in two parts, isn't it? Because you asked what I thought of early access, but also what I thought of that particular genre. Which would you prefer to hear about? I mean, to be fair, I've got all night, so we can do both. But these guys might fall asleep in the front row. I can't guarantee it.
Probably early access, to be honest.
Okay. The early access program is a very interesting idea. And simultaneously, it has allowed a lot of companies to get away with releasing unfinished games and also avoid a lot of criticism by simply saying it's an early access. Steam didn't start this. This has been going on for a while. The meaning of the term beta, or even alpha, for instance, has been changed and has continued to change. I remember back in the day when even a beta product would be just unfathomably broken. It would be almost unusable, and it would be frequently patched to even get it to a usable state. Now I'm sitting in the Heroes of the Storm technical alpha, which is so damn polished and has not crashed on me in over 100 hours of gameplay that it might as well be out, and it's not. I was like, I remember alpha games. They didn't even have graphics ready. It was like purple cubes floating around shooting other purple cubes. And I think that early access is just a symptom of a larger culture in that we as gamers asked for access to games earlier, and we've been begging for that access for the longest time. And it even showed in the traffic for any website that could get a preview out of a title. We would lap that stuff up. We're desperate to see anything about this new title we're excited about. And as a result, the industry adapted because they figured they could get people to pay for that. And they did, in spades, which is why DayZ and Rust and 7 Days to Die and any other game like that are selling millions of units before they're even close to being done. But I feel that in the long term, it's really going to hurt. And the only person that's really going to hurt is actually gamers, because they're going to get sick of stuff before it's even ready. A lot of people are going to play DayZ, and are they still going to play it when it comes out, when it's feature complete? And more to the point, who says when it's feature complete? It's entirely up to the developers. More to the point, who says it's alpha, who says it's beta, who makes the distinction? It's not Valve. So you could have a game in alpha on Steam for 3 years, or you could have a game that comes out, should be in alpha, but they didn't bother to label it as such. And there's been plenty of examples lately of games that have just said, oh yeah, we're just going to skip the early access program. Storm of Vengeance by Eutechnics, the developers of such masterpieces as Ride to Hell Retribution. They released a game called Storm of Vengeance, a Warhammer 40,000 title, and they didn't put it on early access, but in brackets they said beta, as if that's just like some ward against vampires. Like, no, you can't just say it's beta. It's like, all right, you get away with everything then. You're okay with charging full price? No, you're not. There used to be a time when that was unacceptable, and initially I had a lot of hope for early access, but frankly, up to this point, it's caused nightmares for people trying to cover games in early access because they don't know how to do it. Oh, I'm going to make a video on this early access game. Oh, never mind, they just patched it. Entire game's changed. All my coverage is completely invalid. What's the point in that? When are they going to bring it out so I can actually properly critique this and not have people shout at me for looking at an unfinished title? And it's caused problems for gamers as well, who have just been they've kind of all been entranced into the idea of getting access to something early, and I think the dialogue is, oh, you can help affect the game. You can be a part of the development process, as long as you're willing to pay us $30 for the privilege of that, of course. And I don't really think that they are, as much as they are stress testers, more so than anything else. And it would be nice if people just stopped giving them money. That would probably deal with the issue.
That would probably do it.
Would think so, but maybe not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of walking simulators, what do you think of the dichotomy between, or the debate between real games and supposed gone home clones?
Yeah.
Supposed games like Dear Esther, where you don't really do any running, gunning, or shooting.
Or anything.
Yeah. What do you think of the dichotomy between the actual game market, or what people want to see from games, and what they're willing to call games, as opposed to what these newer types of experiences are?
That's a really interesting question. I talked a little bit about it a couple of months ago. I think it was around the time when the Dear Esther devs, the Chinese room, claimed that I said they were destroying the games industry, which I never actually said, but never mind. So here's what I think. I feel a game has to at least fulfill a couple of basic pieces of functionality. And the first one is the idea that you need to be able to fail in some way. because failure also implies a challenge. Yeah? You would think a game is essentially a challenge, right? Pretty much every game in existence has an objective that you must overcome. And I think that objective has got to be a little bit more than, do you have the patience to hold W for 2 hours while this guy rambles at you through the internet? Because that's basically Dear Esther in a nutshell. Very pretty, but it's lacking any semblance of challenge. You can't lose, you can't die, you can't interact with anything whatsoever. And I think that if you gain the same experience from watching a title, which you do in Dear Esther, as you would from playing it, then you've got to ask, hang on a minute, is this a game or is this a virtual art installation we're looking at here? And I think that failure state element is super important. It's how you distinguish between the Stanley Parable and Dear Esther. The Stanley Parable actually has choice. The Stanley Parable actually has a failure state. You can lose, or can you? That's the wonderful thing about Stanley Parable. Losing is winning. Losing gets you a different ending. Throwing yourself off that yellow crane is an ending. You know? And that's wonderful, because you actually have some agency. And the strange thing about Stanley Parable is it's a game entirely about a lack of player agency. That's what makes the damn thing so clever. It's also very funny, which helps a lot. And I think that you need that element of choice, because when I started gaming, I did it because I wanted to be able to affect this fantastic world in some way. Back then, it was affecting a fantastic world of terrible resolution in mode 7 with maybe 8 colors maximum. I remember playing a pool game where they couldn't render brown. That's pretty difficult when you're trying to pot the brown ball. It was a snooker title, actually. So they did, I think it was green with a little red dot in the middle. It's like, that's brown, guys, honest. And even then, I was still able to affect the world, even with that very, very basic technological standpoint. It's just awful engine with a really basic computer backing it up. And now it's so strange that we find ourselves in 2014, and yet some developers are trying to move away from the idea of player agency and gameplay when we have the power to allow players to affect the world in ways never before seen. And every single year we see a new game engine come out that gives us even more capability. And yet some developers decide, you know what would be good with that capability? Let's not have any of it whatsoever. Now, let's have you walk through our little installation. And cool, if you want to do that, fine. But at least be honest about it. Biggest problem I had with Dear Esther is they called it a game. And they even gave it genres. I think they gave it, what was the genre? Indie was one of them, which isn't a genre. Casual is another, which also isn't a genre. And I think they had adventure? Adventure? Really? That's the worst adventure of all time. But I think that it would just be nice if titles like that were actually just forthright and honest with what they wanted to achieve. I don't mind those kind of titles being made. I don't think they should be called games, per se. I think if there's any chance that you can fail it in some way, then yeah, cool, you can be a game at that point. You provide a challenge in some way. But I think there's got to be a distinction somewhere, right? Otherwise, we're just going to end up having what would quite literally be a virtual art installation that you walk through and say, oh, it's a game. Well, by whose definition, you know? So, yeah, I think that's where you draw the line. No worries.
Great. I have a question about gaming video as a business.
Sure.
So, with the way I guess the industry is right now, you see the Disney acquisition of Maker, and you've got, Warner Brothers putting a bunch of money into machinima and that sort of thing, and then, tens of thousands of YouTube creators giving away half their revenue and a lot of their control over to MCNs and different organizations. It seems like a lot of the control is given to big companies. And so my question is, what do you see as the next phase of gaming video from the creator's perspective?
Okay. Well, what you brought up is a very good point, and it's very concerning for a lot of people. And it became concerning far before the acquisition, of course, of someone like Maker. And more of that's happening right now. I believe Screw Attack just got acquired by Fullscreen. So there's consolidation happening. And Machinima, I know, was in financial trouble and things like that. The idea right now is that networks exist for the sole purpose that YouTube is a horrible company to work with in almost every way. They are almost impossible to talk to. They are almost impossible to reason with. A recent example would be that one of my convention videos from PAX, which was basically my opinion on a playthrough that I had done of the new Wolfenstein title, got nicked by a Russian channel, was up there for about a year, got more views than mine did, and I put a copyright claim against it saying, this is my video. And there's an option to say, user uploaded my video. Here's the proof, blah, blah, blah. This Russian guy counterclaimed it. Successfully, I might add. this guy probably doesn't speak a word of English, and yet was somehow able to convince YouTube that he is a rather rotund British man that was, for some reason, at this expo, which is very strange. I mean, I couldn't even read his address. It was all in Cyrillic. But YouTube apparently didn't bother to check that. These are the sort of situations, or the Guys of the Wolf situation where a developer was able to take down 2 critical videos like that, and it took that long to bring it back up, that can make a critical difference when a new game comes out. Because imagine what would happen if someone like EA was able to use that system. One, good luck bullying them with your lawyers. They've got bigger lawyers, scarier lawyers. You can't really deal with that. Not imaginary lawyers like these little indie companies have, but real, actual legal teams. Imagine if they were able to keep your video off YouTube for maybe 30 days. You lose all traffic potential, you lose all voice, you can silence criticism, and YouTube has shown no willingness whatsoever to protect that, none at all. And I think that eventually, what might end up happening for some of these game critics in particular, and maybe even for YouTubers as well, because again, YouTube has shown a great willingness to take down content based on the flimsiest of evidence, including music that doesn't even belong to the person. I believe it was recently a little playthrough of the game VVV was on the developer's channel. His video was taken down due to a copyright infringement claim on the music he wrote. Doesn't matter, apparently. YouTube doesn't care. It took ages to get that back up there. I think that the only thing that's really going to happen, because YouTube right now is so scarily large, and you really cannot operate anywhere else without the support of something like Patreon or Subbable, because really you can't make the money otherwise. The views just aren't there. The eyeballs are not there. That's what all the views are on YouTube, and even providers like Vimeo don't even allow you to upload gaming content anyway. So I think that what would have to happen is that a competitor comes along and is actually viable and people want to use it in large enough numbers for gaming content. Most people I don't think will risk leaving YouTube. Even big YouTubers like JonTron that just reset up the Normal Boots website, who hosts some of his own video there, he only does an early release. He would never risk putting up exclusive video content on there because he knows how risky it is, and more to the point, how costly it is. It almost makes me think that there has to be an innovation in how video is delivered, like the actual technology behind it. Because currently, only really a site like a company like Google has the money to push out that much. Gaming videos are long, and they take a lot of bandwidth. And even then, they still look terrible on YouTube. So they even need to evolve that. But they suck up so much bandwidth, they cost so much money, that there are so few places that you could legitimately and realistically host them. So game commentators of any description, they're not really spoiled for choice at the moment. Let me put it that way. They can go to a network or another network or another network that will all take some money, or they can risk going it alone. And what happens when you go it alone? Well, let's just say if you get a copyright strike, you're on your own. Deal with it, is what they will say. And even after all that, YouTube will still take like 45%. So, yeah, it's lovely. But I guess we don't really have too much to complain about. We get to make videos and don't have to wear clothes. It's kind of wonderful. Thank you.
If SOPA were to come back in some other way and just wipe out YouTube entirely, what would you do from that? Like, if everything you have worked for is gone, where would you transfer to? Would you start going on a website, or?
I don't think I'd ever start another website, really. The maintenance is massive on something like that. And more to the point, as I just mentioned to that fellow, streaming your own video, I mean, I looked at the price to buy mass storage through Amazon S3. It's just crippling. Like, you'd never make that money back. And more to the point, you then have to drive your own ad revenue. You have to actually get your own ads in your inventory, unless you want to trust something like AdSense, at which point you might as well be back on YouTube in the first place, right? I think the only way you could really go if SOPA ended up nuking YouTube would probably to go the live streaming end, at least for a while. I don't think there's much else you can do, because in a situation like that, you're kind of screwed. I mean, you can make as much content as you want, but if you can't get eyeballs on it, it is a complete waste of your time to do it. And it's also completely unviable as a business. I think that there would be ways and means to allow you to continue to create, say, critical content, but on YouTube, it's a very visual medium, and if you can't show what it is that you're criticizing, your video doesn't really have that much value. I mean, something like SOPA would probably plunge new media as it is back into the dark ages, and I'm going to be honest, like, I don't see an escape route from that. it may even involve going back to doing podcasts, which, as we're well aware, you don't make any money from. So I think we'd probably see a lot of pro YouTubers either transition to some other kind of content, which many of the old guard YouTubers actually started doing gaming content. I think we'll probably see just an exodus the other way. It's like, hey, you know what I've been wanting to do for the past 5 years? Sketch comedy! Here we go, let's start. That would probably be a horrible failure, but maybe a couple of people would pull it off. Like I say, something like Soper is just terrifying. It's the kind of thing, the only thing you can do is to just like stop it from even coming into being in the first place. Because if it actually did appear, well, it's a piece of American legislation and you're based on an American website. So even if you want to bail out and go to Sweden, you're probably still going to be out of luck.
Thank you. Scary.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
What do you think of the pay what you want mechanic that a lot of indie developers have been starting to use lately?
I think it shows how greedy a lot of video gamers are. And the amount of really awful posts that I've read that said, yeah, this is a great deal for 1 cent. It's like, wow. So we're looking at 6 titles that more often, will have taken thousands upon thousands of man-hours collectively to create. A lot of these games are in the pipeline for 2 to maybe even 3 years of these guys living on basically nothing, because indie development doesn't really pay very well, coding in the basement. Just like the old days, back in the 70s and 80s, the basement programmer was what was driving the games industry. And then people say, oh, I wouldn't pay any more than 50 cents for this. That's like 3 years of somebody's life. It's worth at least 60 cents, right? You can come up with a little bit more than that. But regardless of all of that, if you look at it from the business side of things and not from the purely emotional side, you'll see that most indie devs are pretty happy with it, and they continue to participate in it. I mean, it's not like they're shoved in there at gunpoint. Like, you got to sell your game right now under the Humble Bundle. No. I mean, they want to be there. There is a desire, a strong desire. There's a waiting list to be on the Humble Bundle because they know it's a guaranteed payout. And what a lot of indie devs have said, which confused me and surprised me greatly, was actually, this is not kind of cannibalizing sales that we would have got. They have not noticed a significant drop in the sales rate of their title. I once said, and this was a long time ago before any of these indie devs actually said anything like this, if you send your game to the Humble Bundle, are you not like basically taking it out the back of the shed with a shotgun? Is that the end of the lifespan for your title? Like, this is as low as it goes. You've sold it on the Humble Bundle, so no one in their right mind would ever buy your game for $5 again when it was available for $1 with 5 other titles. Turns out it's not true. People will buy it, and the exposure that you get on the Humble Bundle is actually very valuable, and the sheer volume of sales is also very valuable, because what you do is you capture a huge audience of people that would have never considered your game in the first place. And that's massive, because indie devs are appealing to a very niche crowd, and convincing a lot of regular gamers that anything that doesn't look like Skyrim or Crysis 3 is actually worth their time is very difficult. Those Humble Bundles can help bridge that gap. They can help get you over that hurdle. So it seems to be a model that, for the most part, is working very well, and I've yet to hear really any dev of note actually complain about it.
Thanks a lot.
No worries.
One more question. What do you think about people taking advantage of Kickstarter showing off flashy content that may not actually really be in the game?
Well, I mean, I think that's almost worse than Aliens Colonial Marines, isn't it? There's a bit of terminology that kind of popped up in the mainstream recently called vertical slice, which is the idea that there will be a demonstration of the game which is a slice of the gameplay, but it's basically kind of like a best of. It's like, this is the 5 minutes we really want to show you, and the idea, initially, I believe, for vertical slice was to actually show it to investors or the publisher. But now it's being used on the public, saying, here's a vertical slice of our gameplay. So this is supposed to be representative of little chunks of gameplay from throughout the game. Now, effectively a trailer without any of the direction, right? But unfortunately, as we found with Aliens Colonial Marines, that vertical slice included stuff that wasn't in the game to begin with, so it's inherently dishonest. In the UK, it's illegal. I mean, the Advertising Standards Authority would have their necks for that, not to mention all sorts of things regarding the Sale of Goods Act and all manner of different pieces of legislation. Doing it on Kickstarter is even worse, because Kickstarter is reliant entirely on trust and passion, and those are the two things that you are just a terrible human being if you exploit in somebody. If you take a look at what someone's passionate about, that they're really emotionally invested in, and you take their trust and also their money, which is what you want, and then you stomp it into the ground, then you're just an awful human being. And more to the point, you're kind of condemning other Kickstarters that are really honest to the fate of being ignored. I wouldn't say the Kickstarter bubble has burst, but I think there's been a noticeable decline in the amount of money that's being given to games lately. Even something like Kingdom Come, which looks incredible. Like, they had a lot of assets, they were obviously well on in their development cycle, raises way, way less than stuff that we saw before. Double Fine Adventure raised a huge amount of money, and there was even disappointment with that from a lot of people, because they raised so much, and they said, well, we're going to split it in two, and we're going to put one on early access because we ran out of money, and people were like, oh no. What now? Will it ever even come out? The problem is there's no legal protection on Kickstarter. There's nothing you can really do outside of a class action lawsuit. And even if you do start one of those and actually succeed, one, will the company that ran off with your money have any money to give you back? And secondly, even if it does give you and the 100,000 other backers money, is it going to even be enough to buy a sandwich? Probably not at that point. It's kind of a waste of time. And Kickstarter just kind of washes its hands of it and says, you know what? You're not an investor. You're not someone that has any legal protection. We said, oh, well, it's illegal for this to happen, but we as a service will not prosecute it, nor will we really give you any help in doing so. And I think at this point, if you're going to put money on Kickstarter, then treat it as gone. Basically, you might as well have taken that money to Vegas and put it in a slot machine and said, you know what, it's gone. If I got a game at the end of it, great. But I think we've seen enough failed Kickstarters now to say that's going to be a risk. And any money you put into Kickstarter should be considered just thrown into the black hole at that point. And more importantly, don't get emotionally invested in them, because that is the road to disappointment, hate, and horrible, horrible things, as we even saw with, in huge amounts with Oculus Rift. That's pretty much the biggest example ever of that, isn't it? Some people got emotionally invested in the idea of Oculus Rift as a company and VR as a vision of what the future could be, and then when evil old Facebook comes along, now everyone's incredibly upset because these guys sold out our vision of the future, when really all those people did was pay a few $100s for a dev kit, which they then received. Just try not to let products define you as a person, I suppose.
Thank you for your time.
No worries.
Okay, I had a quick curiosity question.
Sure.
You've critiqued like tons and tons of games. In my opinion, an impressive amount of quality,
I literally have nothing better to do with my time.
impressive amount of quality content comes out on your channel. And one of your videos, you mentioned that you get most of them to play on like you get a special version, or not version, but sent to you just to critique it, and you say you may or may not go back and buy the product. I was just wondering, what percentage rate do you think you do actually go back and buy the product to play just for fun, just on your own time?
It's not that high. And that's kind of it's kind of distressing, but it takes a really, really special game to get me to play it beyond that point. Even stuff that I really think I like, I'm just motivated to try the next thing. And I think it's mostly out of a sense of obligation, because these devs are sending games every day, and I know I can only ever get to a fraction of them. So if I decide to sink time into another title beyond the video, I almost feel like I'm doing a disservice to the other guys, And gaming, especially on PC, outside of multiplayer games like Heroes of the Storm or Hearthstone or anything like that, is almost something that I'm starting to view, at least in my own life, as kind of a waste of time, because I could be doing work involving that, and that's actually really depressing. But it's fairly rare for me to go back and play more of it past that point. Sometimes, though, it's okay, because I feel like I've kind of had my fill at that point. I've experienced what that game has to offer, and I've appreciated the dev's work, and I've enjoyed the fact that I kind of slightly increased my knowledge about video games, and then I've seen something a little bit different, and I'm content with that. I don't really feel the need to finish it. I remember as a kid, I always wanted to finish every game I got, and because, well, I only got a game maybe every couple of months at most, when I'd saved up enough money to do it. So I played the hell out of some terrible games just because it was what I had at the time. And now I'm drowning in video games to the point where I really only want to experience them. I'm not really concerned about finishing them. So I have a taste, it's okay, and then I go on to the next one. But it's pretty rare. I think there's a couple of exceptions. FTL is a big exception. I did the video on that and then just stunk 40 more hours of that stupid game. And it was wonderful. And I believe the expansion is out. It's either this week or next week. April 3rd, I think, is the expansion for that. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think the only other games would be stuff that is really short. Like Brothers, I finished before I did my video on it. Because why not? It's only 2 hours long. Might as well. Stanley Parable, I don't think you can ever really finish. But I played a damn good amount of it before I did a video on it. So yeah, I'd say percentage-wise, 2-3% at most.
All right, cool, thanks.
No worries.
All right, so at the beginning of your show, you mentioned about like the corporate purchase by Disney and kind of joked around with it. And,
Sure.
We've also seen within like even the past week or two, like the whole Facebook purchasing Oculus Rift and the whole Disney.
Seems to be the season for it, doesn't it?
Yeah, really. So like, what do you think about like the intentions behind these large corporate conglomerates purchasing, trying to almost edge their way quite forcibly into the games industry? What effect do you think that will have on even like content creators like you, the developers, and also like do you think they'll even succeed in that?
Well, I certainly hope there won't be any effect on content creators. I actually asked my representative of the network, so when Disney publishes its next title through one of its, sub-companies, am I going to get in trouble if I say it's terrible? I didn't really like DuckTales. I like the original cartoon, but the DuckTales game, not a fan. If I said that again, would I end up getting in trouble and said, oh, no, absolutely not. But it definitely concerns me when a company that massive kind of owns interests in both sides of the field, yeah? I think that fence has kind of got to be there between a game developer and a games critic. And it's got to maintain it. You can walk up to the fence and the dev's there and you can maybe shake hands, but no, you really won't hang around too much in future. But you can't really interact too much with them because it can really affect your mindset when you're going into a critique. Even if I go and have a drink with a developer, I almost feel like if he puts his game out and then I hate it, I feel terrible about it. The recent example would be Takedown, actually. I met the lead dev, Takedown, and actually played a build at PAX, and the build was pretty good. Like, it was solid for what it was. And then the game came out, and it was just awful. It was absolutely useless. I don't know what on earth went wrong with it, but I felt especially guilty for even saying that because I talked to this guy, We had conversations. We even, we played on the same team when we played the PAX build. And even that is enough. When you get a huge corporation come in that actually owns game developers and is its own publisher, and they somehow now own you as a critic, that's terrifying, I've got to be honest. And there's a lot more of it going on because I think Disney realizes that there's a lot going on in YouTube and they can't really ignore it. So they bought in some way, and that was the way they decided to do it. My hope is that they're really just interested in the maker side of things. They don't really want to mess with Polaris too much, but who knows? I don't think it's ever good. I don't really view it as positive for the network in any real way, other than to know that at least we have financial security for a while. But it's so strange to see a company like that come in because they don't really do anything with the new media side of things. Disney is like one of the oldest media companies. They create traditional media. They have done so for decades now, pretty much a century. So what good would a company like that actually put into new media content, which is more often than not just a guy and his microphone and a copy of Fraps? Probably not too much. So the hope is that they just want in, they want some presence, and they don't really want to affect the content too much. And that's the same, I think, that many people are hoping about the Oculus Rift as well. What does Facebook know about VR? Not a damn thing. But let's just hope they don't mess with the Oculus too much.
All right, cool. Thank you
No
very
worries.
much.
Alright, I was curious about Takedown Red Saber that
Oh, God.
came out a while ago.
Okay.
I bought it.
I'm sorry.
I didn't watch your PSA before I bought it. I was really hyped about it because I really like that genre, as you said about the Kickstarters and all that.
Mhm.
It's kind of a thing. I was wondering, should developers should, as he said, also the technological, should they have a guideline? Just because but when it ran, it crashed on single player, which is unacceptable,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
So should Steam really start taking quality assurance?
Yeah,
on their
should they be
products?
in charge of the QA? Yeah. Well, I think Steam has got to go one of two ways. Either they have got to take more responsibility for QA, so that means doing more than just trying to load it up. I don't know much about Valve in their internal processes, and nobody does because Valve loves to be shrouded in mystery in that respect. But from what I've heard is that the QA process consists of, does it load? Yes. Proof of sale. Great. There you go. And obviously, Takedown in its initial launch state was completely and utterly unacceptable. And anyone that bought it was in for a horrible, horrible time. And it's certainly not the only game. And they have very, very rarely lifted their hand in any respect to do something about that. One of the only examples, in fact, there's two recent examples. One was Motor Rock, which was a flagrant ripoff of Rock and Roll Racing from Blizzard, an illegal one. Because, I mean, they stole sounds from the original game. And when asked if they had permission, they said, well, Blizzard hasn't said anything about it. You what? I mean, you kind of get away with that on YouTube, let alone actually releasing a commercial title for $10 or $15. They lifted their hand at that point because Blizzard, sent lawyers after them and said, oi, get rid of this. And then with War Z, that was most likely due to the fact that the Steam page was a complete lie, And aside from that, though, they have allowed terrible games, and it's very depressing because they, as a developer, know what gamers want. They constantly release AAA quality games to great acclaim. And I have to wonder, like, as a developer, how do you even allow yourselves to release something like that? So they're going to go one of two ways. Either they've got to increase the QA, or they've got to make their refund policy better. One of the two, If you, oh yeah, they're getting beaten on customer friendliness by EA, of all people. I mean, how do you do that? Again, I mentioned the Earth 2 timeline. I'm pretty sure we're on it right now, where this is happening. EA right now with Origin is far more consumer-friendly than Valve, and that's an embarrassment. Like, that should never be happening. And Steam in particular has been very cagey about giving refunds. It's got to the point where, it's starting to get to the point where people in European countries are starting to take them to court over it. There are now court cases starting over this because they refuse to refund products besides you get one, basically. You get one refund. And then after that, that's pretty much about it. You'll never have that again. You can refund anything that you've pre-ordered and hasn't come out yet, but that's really about it. And as you said, Origin has the good games guarantee, where anything that EA publishes, you basically, even if you've played it, you have time to refund that title. You don't even have to give a reason. They will refund you, which is absurd coming from a company like EA, and it's ridiculous that we don't even have that from Valve, who should be in prime position to offer something like that. So it's one of the two, Make your choice. Either QA it more or offer a more robust refund policy is what I would say. The problem is right now they don't have to do either, because if you want to play games on PC, you've got to be on Steam. So, they have a lot of control right now, so we're kind of hoping that either they lose some of that or their morality as human beings gets the better of them and says, yeah, okay, this seems fair. Let's do something fair.
Or hopefully a new company comes in, or a company that can do quality assurance for Steam, maybe.
Yeah, they're making money hand over fist. If you can't do it in-house, send it out of the house. And there's plenty of QA firms that are very good at their jobs.
Yeah.
Let one of them do it. I'm sorry, but if GOG and CD Projekt, a company which is far, far smaller, can not only QA the titles it puts on its store, but make them compatible with operating systems without the original source code, then why can't Valve check whether or not a game crashes on level 1? That seems absurd to me.
Thank you.
No worries.
Well, I think we're going to have to call it a night. Everybody give it up.
Thanks for coming out, guys. Much appreciated.
We will have more panels tomorrow that have Total Biscuit on them. You can come and see him. Additionally, he's got a signing session tomorrow.
I do, yeah.
And we hope to see you tomorrow. This is the end of the show for tonight, but we start again tomorrow at 10 a.m.